Marcus had just finished a long day of meetings and was starving. He'd been in and out of conference rooms all day, bouncing from one place to the next, barely having time to sit down and eat. He'd been in the city for business, but that evening he decided to treat himself to a nice dinner at a high-end restaurant he'd heard so much about. The place was known for its elegant atmosphere and top-tier service. It was the kind of spot where people came to make a statement, and Marcus thought it might be nice to unwind, grab a bite, and forget about the day's stress. There was just one problem. Marcus wasn't dressed for the occasion. It wasn't that he didn't have the clothes to fit in. He had plenty of tailored suits and designer gear at home, but today had been a casual one. He wore a hoodie, sweatpants, and sneakers, a uniform that screamed comfort. After all, he wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was tired, so he showed up to the restaurant looking like a guy who just finished a workout. The moment Marcus stepped through the doors, he felt the atmosphere shift. It wasn't anything overt, but it was a feeling, a shift in the air that made him immediately uncomfortable. The hostess at the front desk glanced at him with barely concealed judgment. She didn't say a word but motioned toward a table in the far corner. Marcus, feeling a little out of place but not fazed, followed her lead. When he sat down, the waiter, a young guy probably in his early 20s, gave him a once-over. It was a look that screamed judgment. The waiter's lip curled just slightly as he scribbled something on his notepad. He didn't greet Marcus with the usual warmth he'd seen extended to other guests, nor did he ask what Marcus wanted to drink right away. Instead, he stared at him for a long moment before finally speaking. "Can I help you?" the waiter asked, his tone clipped and cold. Marcus raised an eyebrow. He wasn't used to being treated like this, especially not in a place where he expected the highest level of service. But he wasn't about to let it ruin his night. He gave the waiter a friendly smile, determined not to let the judgmental vibe get to him. "Yeah, I'll take a glass of red wine, please." The waiter nodded, his eyes briefly scanning Marcus's outfit before turning on his heel and walking away. But as he moved, Marcus couldn't help but notice the whispered conversation between the waiter and another staff member. It wasn't loud enough to hear the exact words, but the way they looked at him, the way they subtly laughed, was unmistakable. When the waiter returned with the wine, it was clear that Marcus wasn't the type of customer they expected. The waiter placed the glass down with a little too much force, and his gaze lingered a moment too long. "Anything else?" he asked, his tone still dripping with disdain. Marcus didn't want to make a scene, so he simply nodded. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and uncomfortable, but he refused to let it affect him. He took a sip of his wine and tried to relax. He was here to eat, not to play games with a young server who didn't know how to treat people. As the evening went on, the service only got worse. The waiter was slow to take his orders, offering little more than one-word answers when Marcus asked questions about the menu. Every time he walked past the table, he seemed to get a little closer to ignoring Marcus completely. There was no smile, no attempt at making him feel welcome. And then came the food. When the waiter finally brought out his entree, it was clear that the young man was practically throwing it on the table. The plate clinked loudly against the table, and a piece of the garnish fell off the plate and onto Marcus's lap. The waiter didn't apologize, didn't even seem to notice. He simply turned and walked away without so much as a glance back. Marcus felt a knot in his stomach. He wasn't the kind of person who let things like this slide, but there was something different about tonight. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or maybe it was the quiet rage bubbling inside him. He didn't want to make a scene. He didn't want to let this kid ruin his evening. But part of him wanted to remind the waiter that looks could be deceiving, that the man sitting in front of him was far more than he appeared. Still, he kept his cool. He ate his food, trying to focus on the flavors, on the conversation in his head about his work and what came next in his life. But the server's behavior kept eating at him, gnawing away at his peace. The evening wore on, and the waiter's treatment became more pointed. He avoided eye contact, made snide remarks under his breath when he thought Marcus wasn't looking, and the service grew even more distant. It was clear that Marcus wasn't getting the same treatment as the other customers in the restaurant. The others, dressed in designer clothes, received the smiles, the friendly greetings, the attention. He got nothing but cold indifference. By the time Marcus had finished his meal, he'd had enough. He knew exactly what he was going to do next. But he would wait. He wouldn't let the waiter know, just yet, that he wasn't some random guy off the street. That's not how Marcus did things. He would play it out a little longer, just to see how far the waiter would push it. The final act was coming, but Marcus knew that when it was all over, the tables would turn, and the waiter would learn a valuable lesson. But for now, Marcus sat back in his chair, slowly savoring the last sip of his wine, waiting for the next round of ignorance to unfold. Marcus had grown accustomed to the strange looks, the silent judgments. It wasn't his first time being treated this way, and it probably wouldn't be his last. In a world where people often judge others by appearances, Marcus had learned to navigate life with patience. He wasn't here to prove anything to anyone. He just wanted to enjoy his evening, have a meal in peace. But the treatment he was receiving tonight was something different. The waiter had finally brought the check over, slapping it on the table without a word. His eyes avoided Marcus's, his face a mixture of apathy and disgust. It wasn't just the cold treatment that bothered Marcus. It was the palpable sense of superiority in the air. The waiter had made it clear from the moment he laid eyes on Marcus that he wasn't worthy of the restaurant's top-tier service. And Marcus was starting to wonder if it was because of his clothes or something deeper. Marcus wasn't naive. He'd been in situations like this before, though usually not in such a high-end setting. He knew exactly what people thought when they saw a black man dressed in casual clothes walking into an upscale restaurant. There was a subtle racism in the air, an assumption that he didn't belong, that he wasn't one of them. But it was more than just a hunch. It was the way the waiter had treated him from the moment he stepped through the door, and it had become more and more apparent as the evening went on. He took the check, examining it briefly before placing his credit card down on the table. As he waited for the waiter to return, Marcus looked around the restaurant. The other guests, mostly dressed in sharp suits and gowns, were enjoying their meals, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the background. The waitstaff hovered around them, attentive, eager to please. But not for him. He had seen enough. When the waiter returned to pick up the card, he took it without saying a word. He didn't bother asking if Marcus wanted dessert or if he was satisfied with his meal. Instead, the waiter simply stood there, holding the card as if he were doing Marcus a favor by even acknowledging him. The feeling of disdain was thick, and Marcus could feel his patience slipping. "Will you be paying with this?" the waiter asked, his tone sharp, almost dismissive. "Yeah," Marcus replied, keeping his voice even. "That'll be fine." The waiter nodded, clearly eager to be rid of him. But then something caught Marcus's eye. He saw the young man glance over his shoulder at the manager, who was standing by the kitchen doors, watching the scene unfold with a smirk on his face. The look they exchanged was enough to confirm Marcus's suspicions. This wasn't just about his clothes. This was about something more. Something deeper. The waiter disappeared into the back, leaving Marcus alone at the table. He leaned back in his chair, allowing himself a brief moment to breathe, to collect his thoughts. He wasn't just a guy in a hoodie and sweatpants. He wasn't some random customer who didn't know his place in this polished world. He wasn't about to let them treat him like dirt. Marcus wasn't used to flaunting his wealth. He didn't need to. He'd never been the kind of person who wore his success on his sleeve. But tonight, with the waiter's blatant disrespect, he felt like it was time to show just who he really was. As he sat there, letting the minutes tick by, he pulled out his phone. Scrolling through his contacts, he made a call to his personal assistant. "Yeah, it's me," Marcus said when the phone clicked to life. "I need you to take care of something for me. Make sure the manager of this restaurant knows exactly who I am. I don't care how you do it, just get it done." His assistant, a professional through and through, didn't ask questions. "Got it. Anything else?" "That'll be all for now," Marcus said, disconnecting the call. He put his phone back in his pocket and sat back, taking a deep breath. He wasn't about to raise a scene. That wasn't his style. Instead, he decided to play the game the way it should be played. The waiter had underestimated him, and now it was time for a little reality check. Minutes later, the waiter returned to the credit card slip, his face still locked in that same smug expression. Marcus could tell that he was hoping Marcus would just sign the slip, leave a tip, and vanish into the night like so many other customers who didn't matter. But Marcus wasn't just another faceless patron. He wasn't someone who would let the waiter's arrogance slide. The waiter placed the slip on the table and waited for Marcus to sign it. But before Marcus could grab the pen, a sudden shift in the air caught his attention. The manager, a middle-aged man with a polished suit and a slicked-back hairstyle, had walked up to the table. His smile was forced, his eyes scanning Marcus carefully. "Good evening, sir," the manager said, his tone attempting to be warm, but came off as rehearsed. I just wanted to personally apologize for any inconvenience you may have had tonight. We take customer satisfaction very seriously. Marcus studied the man for a moment, considering his words. The manager didn't even look at the waiter. He just focused entirely on Marcus, as if he were trying to smooth things over. It was clear to Marcus that this wasn't a spontaneous apology. The manager had been told to come over. Marcus leaned forward, looking the manager dead in the eye. "You know, it's funny," he said, his voice steady but tinged with something colder now. "I was just about to sign the slip and leave. But then I thought, maybe it's time you realized who you're really dealing with here." The manager's smile faltered, and Marcus saw the tiniest flicker of recognition in his eyes. "I don't think you understand," Marcus continued, his voice still calm but laced with an edge. "I've had a long day, and I didn't come here to be treated like some sort of outsider. I didn't come here to be judged by my clothes or by the color of my skin. I came here to enjoy a meal. But clearly you and your staff think differently." The manager swallowed hard, his mouth opening as if he was about to speak, but nothing came out. The waiter, who had been standing off to the side, was now visibly uncomfortable. His bravado was gone, replaced by nervousness. The moment had arrived, and there was no turning back. Marcus was done being ignored. The final move was coming. And the waiter, standing there with his smugness slipping away, would soon realize just how wrong he had been. The manager's forced smile faltered for a brief second, and in that moment, Marcus knew the power had shifted. He wasn't just a man in a hoodie now. He was someone who commanded attention, someone who had quietly and deliberately been underestimated. The air in the restaurant had become thick, the tension rising between Marcus, the manager, and the waiter. The manager cleared his throat, a nervous tick that betrayed his confidence. "Sir, I truly apologize for the service tonight," he stammered, his earlier polished demeanor now slipping away. "This is certainly not the standard we uphold here. Please allow me to—" "No need," Marcus interrupted, his tone smooth but unyielding. He wasn't interested in hearing empty apologies. He wasn't here for the show. He had all the patience in the world, but tonight he wasn't going to let anyone think they could walk all over him. He was done with this. "What I need right now is for you to understand that the way I've been treated here tonight is unacceptable. And I need you to understand something else," Marcus added, leaning forward slightly, locking eyes with the manager. "I'm not here for your sympathy. I'm here because you've made a mistake. Your waiter, your staff, someone made an assumption about me based solely on my appearance." The manager's face tightened, and for a moment, he looked like he might try to argue. But the words caught in his throat. He glanced back at the waiter, who was nervously shifting from foot to foot, his face flushed with guilt. The realization was dawning on them both. They weren't dealing with some random customer. Marcus wasn't the type of man who could be dismissed so easily. "I think it's time we take a look at who's really at fault here," Marcus said, his voice calm but carrying weight. He sat back in his chair, giving the manager the space to process his words. The moment stretched out, and the tension was almost unbearable. "You see," Marcus continued, "I didn't come here to make waves. I didn't ask to be treated like this. But now that it's come to this point, I think you should know who you're dealing with." He looked at the manager, his gaze unwavering. "I think it's time I show you that you don't get to make assumptions about people." The manager opened his mouth again, but Marcus held up a hand to stop him. "I've been in your shoes before, you know. I've seen people like you and your staff judging others based on how they look. It's disgusting, honestly. But I'm not some random guy off the street, and I'm certainly not someone you should have underestimated. I'm sure you've seen men like me, right? The ones who wear flashy suits, the ones who fit the image of what your restaurant expects. But I'm not that guy. I don't need to prove myself to you." The manager's face shifted again, the mask of confidence slowly slipping, revealing confusion and maybe even a bit of fear. But Marcus wasn't done yet. He took a deep breath, the calmness in his voice now laced with something more powerful. "Let me tell you a little story. I'm the founder of a multi-million-dollar tech company. I made my first million by the time I was 25. I built partnerships with some of the largest brands in the world. I travel the globe, attending events, making deals. I own several properties in different countries, and I have an investment portfolio that most people would dream of." The words hit like a wave, crashing over the manager and the waiter, who stood frozen in place. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Marcus didn't need to shout or make a grand statement. The sheer calmness in his voice spoke volumes. The waiter, who had once treated him like a nuisance, now looked as if the ground beneath him might open up and swallow him whole. Marcus continued, letting the silence stretch before he spoke again, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The truth is, I've learned to dress casually when I'm not working. I don't need to flaunt my success. It's not about the clothes or the car or the flashy accessories. It's about who I am as a person. And I don't appreciate being treated like garbage just because I'm not wearing a suit. The manager's face had turned pale, and the waiter had visibly shrunk back, no longer standing with the same arrogance he'd worn earlier. The manager now seemed to be measuring his words carefully, as if he realized the magnitude of the situation he was in. "I'm terribly sorry," the manager stammered. "I didn't know. We didn't mean to." "Stop," Marcus said, his tone firm. "Don't apologize to me. Apologize to your staff. Teach them that people don't deserve to be judged based on how they look or what they're wearing. You should have done that a long time ago." The waiter's face was crimson now. He avoided making eye contact with Marcus, his shame evident in every line of his posture. The manager, clearly trying to salvage whatever was left of his dignity, nodded in agreement. "Of course, sir. We will take immediate action to address this internally." Marcus didn't respond right away. He allowed the manager to finish his sentence before speaking again. "Good. I expect the right changes to happen here. It's not enough to just say sorry. You need to show that you're genuinely willing to change how you treat people, especially people like me." With that, Marcus stood up from the table, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't need to say anything more. He wasn't interested in humiliating them any further. The message had been delivered. Before he left, however, he turned to the waiter one last time. The young man was standing in the corner, his head down, looking every bit like someone who had learned a very hard lesson. "Next time," Marcus said, his voice cool, "don't make the mistake of assuming anything about anyone. People are not their clothes, and they're certainly not defined by what you see on the surface." With that, Marcus walked out of the restaurant, his steps echoing in the silence left behind. The manager and waiter stood frozen for a moment longer, both of them caught in the aftermath of their assumptions. The restaurant, which had once seemed so elegant and polished, now felt empty. As Marcus stepped outside into the cool night air, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. But this wasn't over yet. There was still one more piece of the puzzle left to unfold.